can someone hear me? Can someone just verify that I'm being heard?
I can hear you now.
Oh, okay. You sent that message. I was like, oh. Okay. So we're starting off with some vendor maintenance changes. We've met with the small design group a couple times now in between our last call. And so I've kind of summarized in the first half of this call some of the changes that we talked about in the previous design call and with the small work group. So we've actually added a couple new fields. They requested that we have something to track corporate status in minority owned for the providers. And so we've just done a little drop down for corporate status that has public, private, nonprofit, for-profit, and private independent contractor. And so then there's also no selection. So if you don't know it or don't really want to use this to track corporate status for your vendors, then you don't have to. And when we convert, we'll use the no selection as the default. So all of your existing providers will be set with no corporate status. So if you want to go back and kind of fix those, you'll be able to as needed. And then minority owned will just be a little checkbox. So you can check it if they are minority owned and leave it unchecked if not, and we'll also convert those as unchecked. And so if you'll want to go backwards and update anything that applies. And then we didn't mention that with accepts new enrollees on the last call, we plan to actually convert that as checked. And so if they're like residential vendors or whoever that isn't really accepting new vendors at the moment, then you might want to go back and uncheck that after we release 4.0. So those are a couple new fields. And then if you scroll to the second page, I don't know, you can see I have a mock-up. I'm not sure what you guys are looking at, if you've printed it out or if you're just looking at what we shared, but that's where that is. And then we also talked about adding probation on the last call, but after some discussions with the work group, they said it would be nice to have a time period on probation, because sometimes that applies that instead of it just being on probation, yes or no, that maybe they're being put on probation for a month and they won't be able to restart services with participants until after a certain date or something like that. So that's what those date fields are for, and those are completely optional. So if you just want to use the checkbox to check if your providers are on probation or not, you can do that. And then if you uncheck the probation, we'll automatically wipe those dates out. So if they come off and you uncheck it, you don't have to basically delete the dates too. They'll get wiped automatically. So those won't be something that, stay and have a history of that. Besides, you could, I guess, check the history of the fields, which is the audit log. It's not exactly the same. And then those fields we're going to hide from the vendor, both the hold payment and probation fields. So they won't see those in here. And I think that's it for that. And then we've got the last monitoring visit. That's another new one that we added since the last call. This would just be another optional field that you could use to track when the last time you evaluated your providers, since you have to do that every year. So that's what that is. I went with last monitoring visit because it was shorter instead of most recent, but hopefully that's fine. If anyone has a problem with it, message us or let me know. And then what else do we have? Oh, and so we had a couple things that we renamed. It was requested that we rename the service area field where we have that multi-select for all the counties to just be counties served, since you can't actually, type out specific neighborhoods or cities or other things about a service area, since it's not a memo field, it's just a county selector. So we've changed that name to county served. And then it was also requested that we rename the additional accessibility accommodations, since no one really knew what it was in addition to. And so it just kind of seemed like a silly name. So we went with what someone else provided for us, which was Meet ADA accessibility for. And we're going to add some prompting text probably in there that says like typical things that you might meet ADA accessibility for, like, what is it, physical communication, and I can't remember what the other one was, Melissa. There was a few options that we were, equipment, yeah, that were provided for us. And then, oh, and so then we split up, we talked about adding this days and hours of operation in the last call, and I sent that in the synopsis, and then we had the notes going across the whole bottom. But after we talked with the work group, and we'll get to that later in the reports area, we found that it would be nice to have two separate note fields, one that can go on the provider directory, which was that vendor report that could be posted on your websites, that would include all the managed care regulation things that you need to have. And we had said, oh, you know, if this doesn't, if you need to put something extra, put it in notes, and put it in notes, and we can put that on the report. Well, so then we were talking about some different notes that you might want to keep that you don't want on the report. And so that's where we ended up splitting notes into provider directory notes, which would go on the report and be kind of vendor safe information that you're okay with sharing. And then internal notes where they would only be viewed by your agency, so we'd hide that to the vendors and not include it on the reports for vendors. We do have the option to include it on certain reports so that you guys can use it internally, but that will be optional. We'll talk about that when we get down to the report area. So that's all for the different vendor maintenance changes for the vendor tab. Does anyone have any questions or comments about those fields or anything else that we might be missing in this screen? Okay. Then we'll move on to the reports. So we talked about some of the reports and some kind of very specifics last call with parameters. And so I just tried to do a better, we didn't have very good visuals. So on this call, I've added visuals for the report selection options for each of the three big vendor reports. And we had a chance to work with the work group to kind of iron out these details of what should be on the report better and have a more final answer. And so that's what we're going to go through next. So we were really struggling to decide which field should be included on the vendor report that we were discussing last time, because there's basically two main purposes. One, to include fields that are needing to be included on your website, and so that you can have an easily printable current vendor list with all those managed care fields and regulation fields. So that was one purpose. Then the other one was that we learned is to basically include anything that's helpful about that you are tracking about the vendor during contracts and contract renewals. And that was requiring a lot more information than the provider director report. And so we basically decided, okay, let's create two reports. We'll call the one that needs all those specific fields the provider directory report, and they'll make another one that kind of includes a lot more information on the vendors, and just call that the selected vendor report. We'll start out with just the vendor report, but then we changed it to be called the selected vendor report, because we realized it doesn't really make sense to run the one that includes all the details for all vendors. The typical use case was to be used during contracts and contract renewals. So it would be for one vendor at a time. So for that one, you'll run it for literally just one vendor at a time, and then the provider directory report will be just all active vendors. So anybody that has at least one active rate. And so then you can see I've kind of listed the fields. I'm not going to like read them all out to you. Those are the fields that we've come up with the work group that need to be on there. And for the provider directory report, it was kind of not a lot of work to do, because those what needs to be on there has already been established, and you know, it's the managed care regs. So I think the only thing that we added new though to that is we added a county served filter. So that will be an optional filter. You can basically add any counties that you'd like, and then we'll filter the report by those counties that you enter, and that can be multiple or one, or it can be all. And to use it as all, you would just not enter any counties, and that'll be the default behavior. And I think that's it for the provider directory report. Yep, I think so. Okay, so then the selected vendor report, you can see I've listed all the fields again. It's everything that was up above in the provider directory report, in addition to those fields that are listed in the first 3 bullets. And then for this one, we also have decided to include all of the users and contacts that have a contact type. So what this means is we've talked about users and contacts a long time ago, so it's probably hard to remember, but there are these additional nodes in vendor maintenance where you guys can track, you're already tracking users, but where you can also track contacts. And there's, I think, 5 different contact types that we were given by you guys a long time ago that you'd want to start tracking. And so you can add those as just contacts where they're not even a user. It's more just like, hey, here's this person's phone number and email and name, and this is the contact they are. Or if they're actually a user as well, then you have a little bit more information, but we'd still have the same set of 5 contact types available when you're adding users. And so if you have any users or contacts where a contact type is selected, then those people will include on their report, and we're going to just print their name and the phone number that's associated, if there is one, and the contact type. So that might be billing, or we have like contracts. We have, trying to think of what else we have.
Referral, CEO/director,
There's one more. I'm trying to think of the last minute.
other.
Yeah. And those can be modified in the future. That's the list that we've been given from the get-go. And as time goes on, if you guys end up needing more contact types, we'll be able to update that list. So that's the plan with that. And then also there's the internal notes field. We're adding that as an optional ability to be included. So that's that include internal notes, and there's like a checkbox. If you look at the mock-up, so if you check that, then the internal notes will also be included. And then if not, then they'll be left off, and then that'll make it maybe a little bit more safe if you're actually giving it to the vendor during those contract process. So any questions or concerns about the provider directory report or selected vendor report? Okay. So we also went over the vendor rates report on the past call with the with you guys and with the small design group, and we ended up basically just adding a little bit more fields and adding some additional filters. And so I've listed all the fields that we're including. Again, I'm not going to just read them off, but one of the newer things is adding the optional ability to have the internal notes included. So we'll do that for this vendor rates report as well. And then I've listed all the rate information that we'll include, because this is basically kind of similar to the other 2 reports, only it includes rate information. And then the report will also newly include the referral contacts and users. So that's going to be anybody that's a user or contact that is marked with the referral contact type. And we'll just include their name and their phone number, and not the type, because it'll only include referral types. And then also we're going to change it so that you can either choose to run it for all vendors or a selected vendor. And so it'll default to be all vendors, and then to select a vendor, you would just go in that first drop down that says vendor and select whichever vendor that you want. And then if you are running it for a selected vendor, then the fund source, county served, and fiscal year filters that are underneath it will be grayed out and not available, because it doesn't really make sense to filter them down based on those options after you've already selected a vendor. So then if you do all vendors, then you have those additional options. Fund source, you have to select one, or it can be all. I've shown a selection in there, but we do have all, and the default will be all. And then county served is the same. Default would be empty, and you can add any counties that you'd like, just like we just talked about with the provider directory. Fiscal year will be the current year is the default, and then you can also run it for the past fiscal year. And oh, maybe we need fiscal year to be available for a selected vendor too. We might need to move that one over. And then select rate type is just active rates versus all rates, so rates that have ended. And we already talked about the include internal notes option. So those are all the different filters that we have and different ways that you can customize the vendor rates report. So we're hoping that that can be a little bit more useful. We're also including the residential settings, since there are different requirements for different provider types. So that information will be on the report, but it's not going to be a filter. And the county served might be useful when you're basically just trying to see which vendors are available for certain counties, and that might be helpful for your SCs as well. And we've added that to the provider directory too, so that that could be potentially participant safe, because we receive feedback that some agencies actually like to give their providers or their participants a list of the providers in their areas. What else? I think that's it on all these different report changes related to those three. Are there any questions or concerned comments about the vendor rates report? Okay, so then lastly, for vendor reports right here, we've got 3 new ones that are gonna be super simple. We kind of talked about adding filters to the 3 reports above to be able to get basically a list of vendors that are on probation or have whole payment status or are not accepting new enrollees. And that was getting kind of busy. So we talked with the small work group and decided that it would honestly just be easier to have a quick listing report where we just include the vendor's code and name, and then you guys can follow up more with whoever's on the list and kind of handle it that way. So we're adding these 3 reports that will literally just be a list of who's on probation or who has whole payment checked, and the not accepting new enrollees is the inverse kind of. So if you aren't accepting enrollees, then you'll be on the report. And I guess I should mention too, for probation, it'll be based on the checkbox. We're not going to look at that date at all. So if you have probation dates on there in vendor maintenance, that will not come into effect with the report. So if it's dated and you haven't unchecked them, you're still going to see them on the report. And so it kind of can act as a cleanup value. So you're like, oh, I know this vendor isn't on probation anymore. Then you can run this report, go see who's on there, and oh, that person really isn't on probation. Go back to vendor maintenance, uncheck them, and kind of be a way to help keep your data clean as well. So those are the vendor status reports. Are there any questions, concerns about those? Okay, pretty common theme here. So then we've got the code description reports. We went over those last call, and there wasn't really too many changes, but we basically just changed a couple of the filters. And so I just wanted to remock that up. So the code description reports, there's the service combination one and the fund source service combination. Those are the 2 that we kind of went in more detail last time. The fund source is literally just a list of all fund sources, and taxonomy the same. So for service combo and fund source, we've added the fiscal year filters that we talked about, where it'll default to the current fiscal year, and then you can also run it for the previous fiscal year. And then for service combo, we have the fund source filter and or fund source service combo, I should say. You have to select one and you can't run it for all. So each time you run that report, it'll be per fund source. And that's all the reports. And if there aren't any other questions, then Melissa can move on to fund source changes.
Emily, this is John with Region 4. Just a question about the probation and stuff. Is that just able to look at vendors currently on probation? So if there's no data there, that means that they're not on probation. We don't have the ability to look back. Is that correct? Or we won't
Correct.
have the ability to look back?
Yes, correct.
Okay.
I mean, the only thing I can think of that we would have history on those fields, right, Em? So you could
Yeah,
look
just
at the
audit
history.
history. I thought he was talking about the report.
Yeah, the report.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I meant like the history on it. So we will have access to history, though.
Yes.
Yes,
I think-
like
yeah.
the normal history where you click the little time looking button, if that's what you know, where it's next to the field and you can click the little history button.
Mhm.
Okay.
Thanks.
Yep.
All right, so we'll go move on to fund sources. I didn't get this into the design call agenda, so I apologize, and you're going to see something not very pretty. It's been very busy around here. But this is the spreadsheet basically that I was going to put in the agenda, and we'll put it in the synopsis for you. But those of you on the call, I apologize. But basically, I wanted to send out the current proposed fund source changes because things we found have changed that were needed. So we wanted to update everybody and make sure that this is good. So key changes there are 105 is being kept around because the presumptive eligibility pilot is going to reuse it. The other one I think was 221 is coming back. People are using that and need that as well. I don't know of any else that we're keeping on purpose. I can't remember. So those are two changes. So this is basically the keep list. And so you'd want to, review that to make sure that anything on this list here in the middle are the ones that are going to be removed or end dated, basically, like you won't be able to use them into the future once the release comes out. So those guys are planned to be, discontinued essentially, and you would not be able to use them anymore. I just saw a typo. This guy's coming out. Sorry. I see. This is why I need to look at this. Arranged contractors is in the keep list now. So somehow made it over here. So I'll have to look at this before I send it out because it's not obviously got problems. But anyway, this is what we'll want you to review, which then this can come out to this guy. Oh, it doesn't matter. He's good. So this guy here, I'm going to probably run it again to update it again to get more recent data since we did this the last time on August 3rd. But basically, the red guys are the ones that are discontinuing, and then the count of how many there are, and that count is for all of the agencies involved. So, like this 198 for Fund 200 is spread out across those 4 agencies. It's not necessary. I mean, all but one might be Region 2, but it's not. But who knows who has the majority of that? So your agency may have just one person in there. When you see this huge number, it may not be you. But these are the red ones with the counts are going to be the ones that you're going to want to review and make sure that you have a plan for not using it anymore in the future. If to use one of the keep codes basically, or if not, and you do need these codes, then you need to contact us and let us know so that we can either put it on the keep list or help you find something else that other agencies are using instead. So that's what that is. So we'll send this out to you guys. I'll update these counts again to make sure, because I think some of them have already changed. So so that it's an up-to-date list before with the synopsis. Any questions on this?
Is to jump over to
Melissa, Liz Burns is asking about 802.
annexes.
802. 802 is on our keep list. So that's okay. It's these red guys that are not. Any other questions? So flipping back, the next thing is conversion. So the MDHHS is requiring you to keep records for 10 years. And initially we were going to use January 1st of 2012 because we assumed that, well, we thought we'd already be here, which we're not. So we're planning now, the goal now that is our realistic goal is next summer is going to be the demise of MySys, and everything will be in Compass. So, and because MyChoice switched from fee-for-service claims to the capitated plans that do encounters, and that started on 10/1/2013, we think it would be cleaner and less data to try to convert if we just use 10/1/2013 as our stake in the ground, basically. Just do everything from that. Otherwise, there's going to have to be extraneous code combinations added and converted, and you're going to have to clean up more from pre-capitation life. I mean, include like GAPS TIPS life at that point. And so there may be a couple months gap of not having 10 years worth of data if we choose that date to use as the stake in the ground. But we will still have the data in the database that we can pull from if needed, which I think is really MDHHS's requirement that you have the data. It's not going to go anyway. So we're just wondering if anybody has any opposition to us doing that and making a clean cut at the beginning of fiscal year. It's the capitation land will then all be in the system active, and all of the old pre fee-for-service life of MyChoice would be, you know, not in the system at that point. Does anybody object to that? Or if you do, send me an email. Okay. So then moving on to billing. Did you want to take over here?
Sure, we can do the edits part together though, because I always like panic as to what we said again, but this one's easy. So this is just an updated mock-up of the billing dashboard, which you'll have to ignore. I have a review tab in there which no longer exists, so that's just a bad me being thorough. That shouldn't be there, just in the tabs on the top. So anyway, we just have a dashboard tab and a bill tab now, and this dashboard has the pending review and batches recently reviewed in it. We talked about this a little while ago, but we had a call we had a question on the last call asking about how difficult it is to not have the batch month and year in the batch ID. And I just wanted to demonstrate how we do plan to have that here for the pending review so that you guys can actually better tell the difference between what you're about to review without, you know, having to click and go back and it being annoying. And then the other thing that we added after a great idea on the last call was to have some type of indication of the hold payment status in billing. And so we have added this little hold payment column, which will show any vendors that are on a hold payment, or, you know, if that checkbox is checked in like a red hold status. So that's really obvious, so you don't waste your time clicking on that and then trying to approve bills that we won't end up letting you. So the next little blurb is just saying that if you do end up getting into a spot where you're looking at the bill detail for a vendor who has the hold payment status, and then you try to enter approved information and save, we're going to give you a little error. And that's the next screenshot that says cannot approve bills until hold payment status is removed. So I just wanted to make it very clear that we will not let you approve bills if the vendor has that status. So that's that. If anyone has any questions or issues with that, let us know. I'm assuming that that's enough. Okay, and then, so we've had this on the previous calls before, and we're finally getting to bill edits, so that's great. So basically, when we're talking about bill edits, we're talking about the editing after approval, because we talked on the last call about reclaims, where before something's been approved and verified, vendors would be able to reclaim it, and then we discussed how if they did reclaim it, they wouldn't be able to edit anything in the batch. And so we've got all those specs kind of figured out, but we never had a chance to talk about after things have been approved and verified. And in editing those things. And so this first blurb is more of the recap of editing bills prior to verification. So saying that after vendors send the bills to the agency, the bills are locked for them for any further edits unless they reclaim it, like I just said, but that has to be done prior to the bills being verified. And the bills posted by agent users, those can be edited anytime up until that they are verified because you've submitted them. So that just has like, you know, a bigger weight. And so we know that, well, they can basically change them at any point until you've verified it. And so in order to make those changes, you would literally just edit the exact line that you wanted to change, and the result will be, wait, that's wrong, right, Mel? In order to make a change, vendors and agents will need to make an edit that will result in a credit line and a new line. Won't those ones be just direct changes? I'm already confused.
Yeah, if they aren't verified yet.
Yeah, I think I might have a copy paste error or something.
And then the above ones, I think wrong too with that last word verification. I think they can't reclaim after approval. It has to be done prior to approval, right?
Yeah, I don't, what the heck? Maybe this is old and I've not updated it.
Yeah,
I don't
maybe.
know.
I'm
Yeah.
sorry. I didn't have time to review it, so it's my fault.
Sorry, everyone. That we'll have to send out this in a synopsis. That's just terrible. So sorry, we've messed that up. Yeah, it's prior to approval. And then this one was supposed to be a line saying that there aren't credit lines that are created when agent users are editing prior to verification, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Or is it that there are supposed to because it's been approved? I don't think so.
No, but the agent users, no, they just can change it.
I thought, okay, so that's just absolutely wrong. So sorry about that. But then this was supposed to be a distinction of after they have been verified, how then this is when we do get into the part where we need to have that history and we have the credit line, an original line, and then a new line. And so the plan there is that after they've been verified, no matter if you're an agent user or vendor user, the bill would be basically locked, but it won't actually be locked because that's how we'll allow you to make the changes. And so you'll basically go into a line that you want to change, make the change so it seems like it's editable. But at that point, after verification, when you save those changes, then we'll add a credit line, and the original line will show up on top. Then there'll be the credit line that credits out whatever the original line's value was, and then there'll be the new line for whatever you added, which is an add, which is like, I guess, whatever you entered. So if it said, I have this example on the next page, if it was initially 5 units and then you want to change it to be 8 units, you would go to that first line where it shows 5 because that's all you'd be seeing at the time. You change it to 8. Then as soon as you click save, then you're going to see all these 3 lines where there's the original line, add in that credit line for -5 units, and then you'll see the new line that's 8. And the previous 2 lines will show read only because those are now just a history of what happened, and 8 will be the new line that's the active one, I suppose. I don't know how to say that. And so if for some reason you need to change it again, then you would change the 8 to something and so forth. And so those edits could keep stacking up as time goes on, but that would be like a really terrible scenario. I mean, that's not normal process to have to keep editing the same bill line, but it's possible if, those scenarios do arise. And then what else is there to say about that? We planned on leaving the authorized units and cost per unit fields empty because we don't want it to look like more or less units were authorized for that service when they really weren't. The batch ID column will be blank for credit and new bill lines until the edits are sent for vendors. And so it just depends on if you're an agent and vendor or a vendor, because agents don't need to send bills. So they won't have that batch ID like we discussed on the last call. What else is there? Agent users who are posting and improving bills at the same time will be prompted to enter an invoice number when we save. So when you basically do one of these credits, you'll be prompted to enter an invoice number to assign to the new credit lines and new bill line. And so that's how those will get an invoice number, since that's not in the grid anymore. Editing notes won't result in credit lines and new lines. And here I've given some examples of things that will. So editing the custom service, editing the posted values, and agents editing the approved values. All those things will result in credit lines and new lines. But so it's really just notes that don't. Melissa, is there any more things to say about the edit process?
Yeah, I mean, in this, this is kind of a general overview of what the plan is. So this is kind of our working theory. We wanted to run this by you. It's not really different than what MISIS is doing today. It's just in a different format, because MISIS does that whole credit line, new bill line business. We still have to work out all of the different scenarios, and how that will work. I know we already have an issue with if the units didn't change, like they got rejected the first time, and then so they want to try to rebill that same amount because it got fixed with the sports coordinator or whatever. Then that issue we have to figure out, because it wouldn't be a different amount to try to send than what was original, like this example above was. So we're still working on all of those details. We haven't had time yet to go revisit the interesting scenarios, but in general, we wanted to run all this by you. Any questions so far before we continue? Okay.
So then there's just the zero out of bill example that we've also included, because we realized that doesn't really fit into the above basically plan. So instead of deleting a bill row that you want to remove, you would need to just change the posted units, and approved units to 0. And then when save is pressed, that would create the credit line. So you'd get the -5. And then there'd be no new line for 0 though, because in our database, we can't have a record with 0 units, since units are required. And so because of this, we are realizing that if you zeroed something out, then there'd be no way to go back and add units back in if for some reason that it turned out that day needed to have units. And so then we realized we needed some type of way to add units to that day. So in the mock-up on the previous page, you can better see where that 3-line column is. It's on the very far right. It's a more column that will basically add any other functionalities that we need to use in billing. And the first one that we came up with was this add bill line feature. So for those scenarios where the units have been zeroed out and there's no like active line to edit and add units back in, you would need to use this add bill line button. And so you hover over those little 3 lines. I think people call it the hamburger icon, and then you can click that add bill line. And then at that point, you'd be able to add units back to that day. And if you're an agent user, then you can approve them right in the same scenario. And if it was a vendor, then of course you'd have to submit them, like send them to you. And I think that's it. So are there any other questions or comments, feedback about our general plan for billing? Mel, you don't have anything else, do you? If not, then it sounds like we're good.
No, I think that was it for me too.
All right. Well, thanks everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.